I spent, I guess, 3 months researching, all the documentation that's available uh, from the Gold Antitrust Action Committee that reveals that our currency and the precious metals have been manipulated for decades. And the reason that it's been manipulated and the prices have been suppressed is to protect the US dollar.
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And especially at this particular time when we are seeing liquidity warnings out of the LBMA and the COMEX amidst a surge of demand and just interesting conditions in life. Fortunate to be joined today by Stuart Englert, who just wrote and published the book Rigged, Exposing the Largest Financial Fraud in History, which you can see right there. There's the cover of it. And I might add, wow, that's interesting to know that the gold and silver manipulation is now ranking as the biggest financial fraud in history. I've thought that by the time it's all said and done, that would be the case. So, Stuart, you wrote a book about it, which I am almost done reading. I'm just a couple pages left, but it's been great to read. Great to finally catch up with you today. And how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing just fine, Chris, and I appreciate us finally speaking because we've put this off a couple times, and the book's been out a couple months, and it's doing well. I hope everybody will read it and learn about what's going on with our monetary and financial system. I mean, I think with all the events going on right now, it's pertinent. It's very pertinent. Just the disparity in the price, the spot price, the futures price, and the retail price of gold and silver right now should raise people's, red flags. There's something going on in the system when there can be that much disparity between those prices.
Yep.
I One of those numbers must be fiction when you can have a retail price of gold $150 above the spot price, or an ounce of silver, selling retail for $25, and yet the spot price is $14 or $15.
Yep.
Some of those numbers have got to be fiction. And so who do you trust? Well, the only number I really trust is the retail price, because it's a factual price. It's the price that a buyer is willing to pay to get an ounce of gold or silver. So that's what I trust. And in gold and silver, I trust, I guess. After I wrote the book, I think I trust in it more than ever, because I spent, I guess, 3 months researching, all the documentation that's available from the Gold Antitrust Action Committee that reveals that our currency and the precious metals have been manipulated for decades. And the reason that it's been manipulated and the prices have been suppressed is to protect the US dollar, the world's reserve currency, the currency that is used in 60% of international trade. And that's what I researched in the book. That's what I concluded. And I'm glad you're reading it, Chris. I hope you're getting something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, you laid out, and I think what's nice is, especially for people that may not have heard of this before, I think there's a lot of people out there that watch CNBC, read the Wall Street Journal, and yet there's something about unlimited quantitative easing out of the Fed that doesn't quite add up. And you did a nice job of laying out in a clear and concise way. I mean, it's not like a 500-page, like you got to bear down for the winter to read War and Peace. But perhaps you could explain for folks that might be a little bit new to it, just the basics. And also, I know you actually were a bit skeptical, and you kind of set out to disprove, in a sense, some of the things that you found. So for people who might be new to that, if you could walk them through that process.
Sure. Well, I was a journalist for 30 years. I was a newspaper reporter and a magazine editor. I was an investigative reporter for a while, and that's how I approached this. I'm not a market analyst or anything like that. but I I'd been reading GATA for, I don't know, GATA's website, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, for 12 to 15 years. And, I said, there seems like there's something here, but I need to look into it. I actually contacted Chris Powell, who is the Secretary Treasurer, and asked him if he'd be willing to write a book about price manipulation because, I publish books. And he said he didn't have time. So last fall, I had time, and I spent 3 months going through GATA's archives and convincing myself, based on the documentation and the evidence, that manipulation is going on. I was somewhat skeptical. I said, could this be real? But once you read this over and over and over, and then tie it all together, there's no doubt in my mind that the precious metals markets have been rigged for decades. And 1974 was a critical year. Do you know what happened in 1974?
I believe, well, we started getting stagflation. That was around when COMEX futures were launched, right?
That's exactly right. You nailed it. Yes, you nailed it. That's when gold futures started being traded on the COMEX. Right. And that coincided also with the creation of the CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. Congress enacted a law creating that organization, which is supposed to regulate the gold and silver markets. Isn't that coincidental? Even though some people say that they haven't been doing that, and I think you spoke with Bart Chilton about that. Yeah. So that was a pivotal year, but something else happened in 1974. I believe this is the year that President Ford allowed us to own, buy and sell gold again. And it happened that date coincided with the day that the futures trading started on the COMEX. And guess what? The COMEX is where a lot of the manipulation takes place, because they create a lot of imaginary or paper gold on the COMEX, right? So you tie it all together, and they've been doing it since 1974. I mean, the central banks, in the past have simply dumped gold into the market, right, to suppress the price. Well, with the prices going up, we'll just dump some gold in. But once they got the futures market, they didn't have to do that as often, because they created all this imaginary gold, all right? And as you know, there's a lot more imaginary gold than that there is real physical gold. Who knows? Who knows what the ratio is, all right?
That will be fun to find out one day. And it's interesting you mentioned how they said we're allowed to have gold for something so useless and such a barbarous relic. I don't know why we'd need permission to have gold. Although, again, what I like is that in the book, which, again, we see here is Rigged by author Stuart Englert, who is joining me on the show today. This isn't your opinion. I mean, the things you just said about central bankers talking about, I mean, you have the documentation in the book. I mean, it's Paul Volcker in his own autobiography talked about suppressing the gold price. So it's not my opinion or your opinion. Really, you just laid the facts out for people to see pretty clearly.
Absolutely. And I covered the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Are you familiar with the Exchange Stabilization Fund?
That was actually what I was going to ask you to dig into next. I'm a bit familiar. I can't even imagine what they are up to that we don't hear about, but I think that'd be great if you could explain what that is and how they're involved.
Well, let's just break it down. First of all, exchange. What are we exchanging? We're exchanging currency. We're exchanging gold. We're swapping it, maybe. We're exchanging credit. Okay. Stabilization. What are we trying to stabilize? The dollar, the economy, our economic and monetary system. So there was a fund that was created in 1934 as part of the Gold Reserve Act. All right. President Franklin Roosevelt signed it. Congress passed it. Roosevelt signed it. And the fund that was created was seeded with $2 billion. And you know where that money came from? It came from the gold that was confiscated or surrendered by the American people. I estimate that 4,300 tons of gold was confiscated by the federal government from average Americans like you and me back in 1933, 1934. And the proceeds from that, if you will, the profit from that gold was put into the Exchange Stabilization Fund, okay, $2 billion. And it was designed to safeguard, protect, defend the dollar, the monetary system, and our financial system. And they're still doing it today. Just within the last month, I guess you've heard that some Democrats in Congress called it a secret slush fund. Well, let me tell you, it's been a secret for a long time how this money is used. It's been used to intervene in financial markets and manipulate currencies and precious metals, all to support the dollar. And now it's going to be used as a backstop, all right, for all these handouts and bailouts to big corporations by the Federal Reserve. Isn't that amazing? What comes around goes around, I guess. But isn't it ironic that this fund was created with gold, and now gold is still supporting the financial system?
Yep.
Do you see that? Do you see the irony in that?
Yeah, again, it's they talk about how gold, no one wants it yet. Why did they take it in the first place? How is that national security? And didn't during the recent stimulus package, or porculus package, as I've heard it referred to, didn't Steve Mnuchin even reference, one of these guys, I believe it was Mnuchin, referenced the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which I found unusual because you just often very rarely hear about it.
Absolutely. Mnuchin did mention it. As part of this $2.2 trillion CARES Act passed by Congress last month, that act provided $500 billion to the Economic Stabilization Fund to offer as loans to distressed corporations, states, and municipalities. And the funding is going to be used to backstop any losses that the Federal Reserve's lending programs have as part of this stabilizing of the financial markets and the money markets. So it's still being used. It's still being used, but the problem is there's no transparency to it. That's why the Democrats called it secret. I mean, Mnuchin doesn't have to tell you, or the Federal Reserve doesn't have to tell you who's getting all this money.
Yep.
Strange.
Yeah, it was interesting how somehow the Fed even getting less disclosure than before, in the midst of being given an unprecedented amount of power. And like you and I talked about before we started recording, certainly a lot of money that has flown out quickly in the last couple of weeks in response to Corona. Again, I'm here with Stuart Englert, the author of Rigged. Stuart, before we wrap up today, for the gold and silver fans out there that have been studying this for a while, I know that in the process of completing a book like this, you come across a lot of interesting tidbits and stories. Anything you could share that maybe stood out to you that's a fascinating piece of gold and silver trivia or history that people probably haven't heard about yet?
Well, let's see. Much of what I learned, I haven't included in the book. Let's go off beat a little while. Are you familiar with the Wonderful Wizard of Oz?
Yep.
Did you know that it's a monetary allegory?
Yeah. I actually have heard that before. David Morgan talks about that a fair amount too.
Okay. Well, the author, Frank Baum, in his 1900 original novel, Dorothy's slippers, remember Dorothy's slippers? They were silver, okay? Dorothy's had silver slippers, not the ruby red we remember from the classic film, but silver slippers. And she was following what? The yellow brick road, which represented gold, right?
Yep.
The Cowardly Lion supposedly represented a politician back from the 1800s, William Jennings Bryan, who was a Democrat populist who supported bimetallism, free silver as it was called. He wanted silver to be part of our monetary system. He wanted a bi-metal standard because the bankers controlled the gold and the common people like you and me had the silver. So he wanted to elevate silver in the monetary system. He ended up losing to William McKinley, and his hopes for bimetallism faded. And he lost his enthusiasm for bimetallism. And so Frank Baum apparently made him out to be the cowardly lion in The Wizard of Oz. How about that for a tidbit?
It's amazing the history that's out there. It makes you always wonder what we don't know yet. Although, again, for folks who are watching, if you're thinking, geez, this sure is fascinating what happens in this financial world. And if you're wondering what you haven't heard yet, well, again, fortunately, Stuart was kind enough to put Rig together. So, Stuart, in wrapping up, if you could let folks know how they could reach you, where they can find the book. And also, we're giving away a free copy, I hear, for anyone that, if you just take this interview, post it, and tag Stuart Englert, Englert, and myself, Chris Marcus. On LinkedIn, we're going to pick a winner to give away a copy of the book. So you can go do that now. And since not everybody is going to win, Stuart, how can they pick up a copy for themselves?
Well, Rigged is available in both ebook and paperback at Amazon.com. All you have to do is put in Rigged, Exploring the Largest Financial Fraud in History into Amazon. You can find the book, or put my name in, Stuart Englert, Englert. If you want a signed copy, you can email me directly at srenglert@comcast.net, and I can tell you what you have to do to get a signed copy of my book. Chris, I appreciate you having me on so much. I appreciate you spreading the word, and I understand you've got your own book, The Big Silver Shark, that's going to be coming out soon in paperback. It's already in audio. And I'm glad both of us have found a forum to tell this story.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I appreciate what you've done. I think we need as many people telling this story as possible, because as folks are seeing these things, it's playing out in the gold and silver markets now, and not just gold and silver, but the treasury market where the Fed has gone wild. So I appreciate that you're sharing that again in Rigged. That's right. You guys go right now. You should be already on LinkedIn tagging Stuart Englert and Chris Marcus. Post the interview so we can let folks know about this. Stuart, I thank you for joining me and for sharing something that's important for people to be aware of. And we'll look forward to doing this again soon.
Thanks, Chris.